we're in a massive housing crisis at the moment that is bad, and it's going to be bad for a long time.
If we set ourselves up for success with all electric now, we're setting ourselves up for a greener future.
We feel personally that there's not enough awareness with the consumer that these products are available.
Welcome back to the Property Now podcast, brought to you by Coposit. I'm your host, Michael Carboni. My friends call me Carbs, as you do, hey man.
Hey Carbs.
We'll introduce you in a second, but today we're talking about sustainable property trends. It's questions we get a lot. More and more people are talking about it. And as always, I'm no expert, so we've got some experts here with us. Ian Vanderburg, the Senior Development Manager for Norwest Quarter at Mulpha. Welcome, mate. Norwest Quarter, one of the biggest projects, I think, in Northwest Sydney. It's been going for a few years. It's been described as a new benchmark for luxury and sustainability. You might have said that, but that's what people are saying. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good.
Welcome to the
long-time listener, first-time caller.
Hey, you're the first person to ever say that, so I love that. That's fantastic. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Obviously been working with us for a long time, so always good to have our partners here in the flesh. And our next guest flew all the way from Melbourne this morning just to be here for us, so really appreciate having you here, Ali Whelan, the Associate and Design Lead at Breathe Architecture. Also, according to the ADR, the Australian Design Review, you were in the 30 under 30s. So I think a round of applause for that, for the championing sustainable living and livable cities. So definitely an expert.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and very passionate about the sustainability of our homes and the future of our cities. So I'm really excited to be part of this conversation.
Amazing. We had some early convos, pre-convos. The passion was there. I can't wait to see it. Now that the cameras are on us as well, it's going to be amazing. And of course, I can't sit here without having the sexiest voice in property podcasting.
Thanks, Carbs.
Resident mortgage broker, Jason He. You've printed out your notes on paper, not very sustainable.
Mate, it was not a great way to start this pod.
Absolutely terrible, but you're here to talk.
I hope it's recycled paper.
It's recycled.
Look, I've been using this for ages.
You've been using the front and the back.
Mate, just everywhere. Yeah.
Amazing. You're here to talk, I guess, from a customer perspective. What are the incentives? There's a thing called green mortgages.
Yep.
Which I'm excited to hear all about.
100%.
Amazing. But we're going to start with, I guess, the market demand. So consumers are starting to ask for certain things in their homes. Developers are listening to these things, and architects are designing these things. But Yen, what are you seeing out there? What is the market what is the market demand? What is the consumer attitudes for eco-friendly, sustainable living? And what are the Mulphas of the world? What are you guys doing to sort of deliver that and answer those questions?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing buyers asking more around sustainability beyond the sort of typical questions that we've always heard around, does it have solar panels, does it have EV charging? They're getting more sophisticated around the questions they're asking. They're asking questions around, how comfortable is my apartment going to be? What are the running costs of my apartment? Because the climate's getting more dramatic, and so apartments are getting more expensive to cool or to heat given these dramatic changes. So we are seeing that change. The people at Real Estate and Domain, they're both telling us that they're seeing an uptick in people asking around those questions. But reflecting on my own journey, I was looking at purchasing an investment property last year, and it's a complex kind of landscape that you find yourself in, because not only are you looking at a location and what infrastructure may be coming, what may benefit you or hurt you in those areas, what is the apartment, the finishes, the amenity, all of those things, the developer, the builder behind them. You then layer on sustainability. It's a lot of things that people have to ask. So it is complex, but the more people ask about sustainability, as you said, the more developers will meet that demand. Developers naturally want to meet demand. They want to de-risk their project. So if more people ask about it, more developers will do it. And we started hearing about that at Norwest Quarter, where we started this project in 2019. It was very early in when buyers were asking those questions, but we also felt sort of a moral responsibility to do the right thing. And so we worked out, what could we do and how could we get value out of that. And Norwest Quarter, it's the whole project's 900 apartments. The first stage is 200 apartments. It's one of the largest projects, or it is the largest project Mulpha's ever done. It's the largest in Norwest. And one of the biggest things we made a commitment to do was to make it all electric. So there's no gas in the project, no fossil fuels in the project. So that's the apartments are all electric, the retail's all electric. And that's actually been really well received by our residents. The retail, a little bit more challenging to get retailers across the line. Not impossible, but it takes a little bit more work in finding those retailers and educating them. But the apartment buyers were actually really, they saw the benefits of induction cooking and generally in an all-electric building. And then we did a few other things in it. We made the building perform really well thermally. So we prioritised in our brief to the design team that we want this building in its own right to perform really well passively. And when I say passively, Ali can kind of detail what that means, but it means that, year round, you don't have to have a heavy reliance on air conditioning. If it's cold, you don't have to cool it, and if it's really hot, which in Western Sydney it's get really hot, you don't have to cool it down. And that doesn't have to cost anything more for developers. You can do that at no cost if you prioritise that to your design team early.
So good segue to Ali. Like, what does that mean? What does passive design mean?
Well, so I think there's a growing conversation generally in construction around carbon at the moment, and it's a really great discussion that's really taken. It's started to take a front seat in a lot of rooms, which has been really exciting. And I think there's two sides to carbon. There's the upfront carbon, and then there's the embodied carbon. And upfront carbon, we're still understanding what that looks like and what that means for the future of construction, and it is really complex. And I think we can sort of circle back to that a little bit later. But the embodied carbon piece, as Jan touched on, it's actually pretty straightforward to solve. And so, when Breathe have been delivering all-electric buildings since 2017. When we delivered our first all-electric apartment building in 2017, we were told by a real estate agent it would never sell. Like it was seen as super controversial. No one would buy it. Why would anyone buy an apartment without gas cooking? Because that was the norm. And unfortunately, real estate data is historic data, not future projections most of the time. And now in that same suburb, it's very hard to actually sell an apartment with gas cooking. So we've seen buildings that have been put to market with gas cooking been, redesigned with induction cooktops because the market has shifted, and the market is, as Jan said, is becoming more intelligent as to what they want in their homes and how they want to live more sustainably. And so the upfront, the embodied carbon piece is, it's about all electric, and then it's about connecting to 100% certified green power.
Yep.
And one of those pieces is actually incredibly simple for anyone to do right now. Maybe a little bit more challenging with embedded networks, but my home is connected to 100% green power. The most frustrating part was that I had to get in touch with my energy provider, and I had to have several phone calls to get 100% certified green power, which it shouldn't be that hard. Yeah. It doesn't add much cost to my energy bills. And, and that tells the market where I want to see my energy coming from. So as a buyer, as a consumer, we have the potential to, to change the market demand for green power, which is a really powerful thing that as consumers we can do. If you're in an apartment building with an embedded network, that might be looking more at speaking to the owners corporation and hopefully not having to change providers and just like changing the way that your power is connected through the, just through the billing methods.
And I think there's a lot of talk around, the fact that our grid is still, it's not all renewable. So why change a building to being all electric or going to an electric car when the grid's still full of coal power? And you can't change a gas building to be more sustainable. It's always going to rely on gas. But an all-electric building has the capability of being powered by electricity, and the grid has the ability to change to being renewable. And the government's got that mandate that it is decarbonising the grid. So future-proof your building by going all-electric, and then in the future it can be slowly decarbonised. Or now you can opt for green power and have a zero-carbon building right now.
And you can have your say as to how we want the market to change in the future, because you're absolutely right. If we plug gas into our buildings, we know that building will, unless people then go to try and change it, and I'm happy to talk about how we can take existing buildings and look at retrofitting electricity into them. But, if we set ourselves up for success with all electric now, we're setting ourselves up for a greener future just by not plumbing gas into the building, which, Jan, you probably have some insights as to the upfront savings of not plumbing gas to every single apartment in a building.
Yeah, exactly. So the Norwest is it's not a city centre project. It's not a one Barangaroo. It's not a super affluent area. So it is affluent, but we were challenged to make the building more sustainable. So we had to do it in a way that wasn't going to cost our building anymore. So the one was making it perform really well passively. So we briefed that in quite strongly. And the second big move was making all electric. And as Ali said, by making it all electric, you can take out all of the gas reticulation, all of that coordination with authorities. You just have electricity powering everything, and you're future-proofing the building into the future.
And we all know that one of the biggest costs, unless you're in an incredibly inefficient home from an energy perspective, one of the biggest costs of your energy bills is actually the connection and supply charge. So you take out one of the supply charge and connection charges, and you're only paying electricity supply charges.
It's a good point, because people assume the costs involved with going green, so all these things, that there may be a little bit of upfront cost, but over the time it definitely...
I think sustainability has an idea around it that it's more expensive. And at Breathe, we have positioned ourselves on a sustainability of reductionism. So one of those things is taking out gas reticulation and then questioning kind of everything that goes into a building and taking out what we don't need. So we can take out the gas because we can make it 100% electric. And, that goes down to materials and other things as well. But I think sometimes sustainability is overcomplicated as what kind of technology can we put into a building to make it more sustainable, whereas sometimes it's about doing more with less.
Less is more.
Taking out what we don't need and looking at material consumption of raw materials and just not putting as much into a building. Like it doesn't have to be complex technology to make something more sustainable.
There's a lot of the view, as you said, of sort of gold plating developments to make it sustainable, but Breathe, through their work and their work with Nightingale, which is a affordable housing solution that is incredibly sustainable, proves that you don't have to make it more expensive, that if you integrate it early from the beginning, you can have a very sustainable building for no or less cost.
It's like your Tesla, Jace. Less inside, but more
100%. 100%. Because I was just going to ask the question, with the Mulpha building in Norwest, how would the charging work for Tesla drivers or EV drivers?
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, just for a friend out of curiosity.
Yeah, they license plate recognition your license with the Tesla logo. You got to go elsewhere. EV charging is huge. Huge. You look at all of the existing buildings, strata buildings, and they're really struggling to get EV charging in because you've got owners corps that don't want to spend money to put charging in because there's no benefit to them.
But how complex is it to put a regular power point in? Like you can charge a Tesla from a regular 10 amp power point. You don't need a fast charger.
Right,
Most people charge their vehicles overnight.
The billing's a problem. The billing and the owners corp have to then work out. You're getting a whole bunch of energy draw that the owners corp has to share. How we did it was we put some fast chargers up in our sort of retail car park so that both the public and our residents could use one of 4 fast chargers. Yep. But then we provisioned the whole basement so that all 270 bays could upgrade to an EV charger now or into the future. Okay. So there's a energy management system that we don't have a ridiculously big sub that has to power all 276 cars in one go. It then will see how many cars are connected into the system and then prioritize and make sure that everybody gets enough of a top up overnight. So that doesn't cost us a lot more money. It's just a bit of thinking up front to future proof it.
And I think that thinking, like I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't want to be either. But, the demand management is really important when we're looking at all electric buildings because, something like if a base model plugs in that there's 200 EVs being charged in this building, unless you're sort of being strategic about the demand management of that, it would suggest your substation needs to get way, way bigger. And we had feedback from some services consultants early on with all electric buildings that we needed massive substations that assumed all of everything was on all the time. And that the electrical demand of the building was huge, when actually it's about demand management, and that most people are plugging their cars in to charge when they're asleep and they're not using much other power. So being sort of, questioning that and being strategic about that from a design perspective is really important to make sure that it's not costing the development a whole lot of money on the way in.
Ali, do you see a time where there's no gas at all?
So in Victoria, as of the start of 2024, no gas can be plumbed into new residential buildings, which is amazing. We love it. Yeah. It makes, we're now no longer... I think for a while in Victoria, we've not really had to fight not to put gas in buildings, but it's an as of right. In New South Wales, unfortunately, that was not adopted at the same time, but there are councils like City of Sydney, Parramatta, Waverley City Council have all banned gas in new residential buildings, which is great to see. So there are sort of councils taking matters into their own hands and saying this is really important for the future of our population. I do see a future where gas is just and I think it's a fast approaching future where gas is not it's already not a smart idea, but where it's not even an idea that's considered. Hopefully that's very soon.
Well, you know what's interesting? I live in a older townhouse, so 1970s build, so before all of our times, no gas.
Isn't that amazing?
So
some of our older building stock is actually easy to retrofit because it is already not connected to gas. We retrofitted a old motel, a 70s motel, in the last 2 years, and we went in thinking, okay, we're going to have to look at the gas and servicing structure, and actually all the cooking was already all electric, and it was a lot more straightforward than retrofitting some buildings that are only 10 years old, which is a real shame.
You've mentioned retrofitting a few times. What would someone in an existing home, if they want to go in this direction, what are some of the steps they should take, or who should they speak to? What would they do?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess there's two sort of pathways here, and one is if you own a freestanding house, and then the other is if you're in an apartment. And so if you're in a freestanding house, I'll start with the apartments because I think there's a few steps that then the pathway becomes relatively similar. If you're in an apartment, the first step is probably to talk to your owner's corporation, or is it body corporate in New South Wales, and understand what services are connected in the building, and hopefully there's an opportunity to speak to the owner's corporation about changing the connections of the whole building. That might be really aspirational because it requires buy-in from a lot of people, which can be really hard to get. But so then, at least understanding what systems are in place in the building that you might then need to investigate yourself. So then whether you're looking at retrofitting just your apartment or your standalone home, understanding what systems you've got and starting to do some research about, is it your gas cooktop that needs to be replaced for electric? Is it your hot water system? Is it your heating? So 40% of our energy use in homes is on average is used for cooking, and 29% is used for hot water. So if we start with those two big numbers, they're kind of the two big things often to tackle. And there's some really great resources out there. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on knowing exactly what that pathway looks like, but there's a resource that I have found quite recently that was put out by the City of Marybeck and Yarra City Council in partnership with some great industry experts. Obviously, it's a Melbourne-based resource, but I think it's applicable interstate as well, that talks about how to electrify your apartment. So it does talk about the building-wide strata-based, sustainable strata, and then on an apartment-by-apartment basis. It provides some, upfront cost estimations, but it also provides a cost-benefit analysis or a payback period for some of these appliances, which is quite important information to arm yourself with. But I think importantly, it's not, you don't have to go and do it all in one day, and these things can be incremental over time. You might pick, for instance, the cooktop might be the first place to start, because you might also see the health benefits of not lighting a gas flame inside your home every day. So that might be somewhere that you want to start from an electrification perspective, or it might be based on which appliances are coming to end of life. So if your hot water unit is failing, you would replace that with an electric one instead of replacing it with a new gas hot water system. So I think it goes hand in hand about sort of life cycle of the existing infrastructure, and then also what's most important to you as a consumer in terms of your priorities, and probably understanding where your energy usage is. If 40% of it's on cooking and you can reduce your gas consumption by 40%, that's a major step.
So you can probably plan it out over time. It's
Absolutely.
Not like something you have to do all in one hit.
No, and I think that if we tried to say that it has to be done all at once, it's really overwhelming and really expensive. Yep. So, planning these things incrementally, looking at the payback period of installing an induction cooktop might be 3 to 5 years based on the reduced operational cost of running an induction cooktop. So then, okay, if after 3 years it's been paid back, then you can look at the next sort of relevant changeover.
Yeah. We've done that recently at home where over the years in development, as I kind of become more and more educated on this stuff, like I started with the solar and the battery. When we were selling townhouses 8 years ago, we played with doing that, and I put it into my own house to kind of test it. And now with noise quarter, changed over the cooking to induction, and getting that experience. And as Ali said, the health benefits that are huge. Gas cooktops have been linked to asthma in kids, and I've got 2 young kids, so that was pretty important.
Benefits,
cleaning
a gas cooktop
gas cooktop's a nightmare.
So frustrating.
So is the whole idea with the gas, like, is it traditionally, let's say the consumer sentiment that they prefer gas? Because I know there's some friends and family, there's no gas in this house, it's not great, right? But I'm thinking, what's the rationale behind it? Is it typically people think that it's more economical, that gas is cheaper to heat, for water, for cooking?
I think before induction, you had electric cooktops and you had gas. So the gas was seen as a premium to electric, which was pretty poor.
Right.
But now you've got induction cooking, which is far superior to gas. So it's a hangover, I think, from the past where gas cooking is seen as a premium.
Right.
It's definitely a hangover to electric cooktops when there was an induction. It's that hangover that people are still sort of, they see induction in the same category as electric, and it is just so poles apart, those two options.
Yeah. They're also just on the payback, there are lots of government incentives or local council incentives around changing your home over to being electric. So we're in North Sydney, we had rebates that we got back from the local council for changing over to induction, which helped. It wasn't significant, but I don't know, it was maybe
it's absolutely worth arming yourself with that information as well, to wherever possible, to reduce the upfront cost to the consumer. And so I think there's kind of 2 streams that the government are trying at different levels to impact gas in homes, and one is new builds, and then the other is, where possible, they're seeking to provide rebates to consumers.
Yeah, right. And certainly here in New South Wales with the new builds, there's government now, and this may be the case in Vic as well, let us know, but certainly in New South Wales, they're planning these developments around current infrastructure. So, closer to your transport hubs, closer to existing infrastructure, which is great for, I guess, for a sustainable aspect as well, but also health benefits as well of, being able to walk to the cafe or what have you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, Jan, you could probably talk to some of the government infrastructure spending parts of this, but from a sustainability perspective, the day-to-day operational energy consumption of a home is one thing, but how your home and the location of your home impacts the sustainability of your overarching lifestyle, I think, is really important to consider as well. So if you purchase a home that's near public transport, cycling lanes, and where you can walk to get your coffee or your groceries, that's going to lead to a more sustainable lifestyle just by default. So if the default option isn't to get in your car and drive somewhere, your lifestyle is inevitably going to be more sustainable and, as you said, healthier, because you're more likely to walk somewhere. And then, if we're talking about health and long-term health benefits of a more sustainable lifestyle, by not driving into your garage behind toughened glass and never speaking to your neighbours, you start to meet your neighbours, you meet your local barista, and that social connection, I mean, I'm not an expert in wellbeing and the, I guess, health science behind that, but the Blue Zones documentary on Netflix, for example, talked in every single Blue Zone, the health benefits of social connection were abundantly clear. So, I think that we can think about sustainability as also something it's healthy for the planet, but it's also really healthy for us to live more sustainable lives.
I love that Blue Zone stuff, man. People living past 100 because they have to walk more places, or there's a little sort of incline.
Walkability is huge. The amount of social connection you get just from having improved walkability, it's incredible. You pepper through some cafes in a local area, and people just get out and they interface with different demographics. And back to your initial question of how the government's changing their thinking, we're in a massive housing crisis at the moment that is bad, and it's going to be bad for a long time. And so the government has looked at how can they get most bang for buck in getting housing supply out, and it's not urban sprawl, which both ends up in unsustainable land use, people that are disconnected, but also very high infrastructure costs. The cost to service stuff as you spread out is far more than capitalising on existing infrastructure and amenities. So there've been a raft of planning changes that have happened over the past 2 years where the government is upzoning around existing mostly around existing transport, because around transport there tends to be a lot of amenity. So upzone those areas, get more density around those areas to capitalise on what's there already. So then that lands with more sustainable developments, because you don't have to commute as far. You can have more walking, more cycling, more social connection. So it's a good move. There are concerns around traffic congestion and how we're going to get more schools, but that needs to happen as well. There needs to be enough money put into those that we don't end up with congested roads and schools,
hospitals, everything.
Exactly.
And that is important. I've been at a Mulpha event where a few of the locals are asking about, okay, what's this going to mean for traffic in the area?
Yeah, number one.
So everyone's always keen to understand that as well. What about so we spoke about initial cost concerns, and I think we covered that quite broadly and well. One of the biggest things is the potential resale advantages. So for a savvy or sophisticated investor, it's actually probably a safer asset if these considerations are in play when you're buying.
For sure. You see that in commercial and retail assets, how investors are favouring more sustainable assets because they're future-proofed. They're going to be able to get finance easier because banks want to lend into more sustainable assets. So the commercial retail space has been there for a long time. They're more of a sophisticated investor. That's starting to spill over into residential. So we're seeing more of an appetite for sustainable assets, both now and for future-proofing it. You're then eligible, as you've mentioned, for green mortgages. So because the banks are looking to decarbonise their portfolios, they want to be seen to be lending into green assets. So they're offering incentives to buyers, which I'm sure you can elaborate on what that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So what I find with the green home loan product with the banks is that we feel personally that there's not enough awareness with the consumer that these products are available. So they fall into two categories. So you've got one where it's a loan for renovation to put in the battery, so a loan, for example, with CBA, $0 to $30,000. So that'll fund a $10,000 expense to putting a battery. And you're getting interest rates like 3.99%. So it's cheaper than a home loan. Yeah. And it's unsecured, right? So typically what we see a lot of these battery providers is that they team up with a personal lender. And they go see homeowners, and if you want to put in the battery, you don't have the money up front, you can get a loan, and a personal loan is like 9-10%, whereas the major banks like CBA, for example, are doing 3.99% approximately. So the incentive is definitely there, but I don't know how many people know about it. I mean, even for us, we rarely ever have anyone inquire with us around are there any green home loan options. There's even banks that, for example, Bank Australia, which used to be the CSIRO, I think, credit union. So they're very green because they don't invest in any projects related to fossil fuel.
That's why I bank with them personally.
Yeah, right. But rarely we have any clients asking us, do you have any options in terms of, a green bank, right? So it's usually something that we talk to them about, to find out, do you have a preference? There are these differences, and they also offer an incentive where you get a discounted rate if the property is, I think, the 7-star rating. But I think a lot of it applies mainly to fully detached houses as opposed to apartments. So we haven't come across the terms and conditions where it talks about if you're buying an apartment, it's got a certain rating, you can get a discounted rate. So
it's still early. I think there are not enough sustainable assets being developed to have enough appetite for the banks, and there are only a few banks that are doing it. So it's still early, but hopefully it's gaining a bit more traction. Our apartments that we've got, you talked about a Natchez rating, which is, I think, a really underutilized tool in the industry. So a Natchez rating, it's a nationwide rating, came out in 93. Every house and apartment since then has had to be rated for its energy efficiency, and not energy efficiency in terms of the appliances, but how that space will perform with having to have heating and cooling. So,
which I think maybe is a nice dovetail into energy efficiency of homes. And if we're thinking about costs associated with a home, there's obviously the upfront cost and the ongoing operational cost of a home, which I think sometimes it gets overlooked because it's quite hard to quantify at face value. But, if we keep building glass towers, like greenhouses are glass, they're intended to keep heat in. We're building homes like that, and particularly in bedrooms where most of the time you're in your bedroom, you're asleep. we don't need 100% glass walls. From a privacy perspective, people don't love it. They shut the curtains. So, I think that if we keep building homes like that where people are relying purely on active heating and cooling to make a space comfortable rather than just building a good thermal envelope, then we're leading ourselves down a really
especially as the climate gets more aggressive as well.
Absolutely.
It's just going to get hotter. And so particularly in Western Sydney, it just cops that western sun. And you end up, as you said, in glass towers that are incredibly expensive to then cool. And then they are negatively affected. That, firstly, people have to move to Western Sydney for affordability, and then they hit with really disproportionately high power costs.
And obviously it's a balancing act between maximising daylight and natural ventilation, because that can reduce other operational energy requirements. But, it's this kind of balancing act where putting in too much glass can lead to excessive heat gain in summer if the glass isn't appropriately shaded. It can also lead to heat loss in winter if we don't get any good winter sun in. And so, it is a fine balancing act between enough glass and window area to give us good daylight and operable windows for natural ventilation, and also, thermally efficient buildings which reduce ongoing costs for residents.
So do you consider that in your design, Ali? Like,
Absolutely.
Is it like which way rooms are facing, where windows are, what walls windows are on? Like, what do you sort of look at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess ultimately often we're building apartment buildings in existing residential contexts. So we like to face our private open space to the street so that there's good aspect and amenity. And that's not always going to be north. Ideally it would be, but it's not always the case. And I know that the New South Wales Apartment Design Guidelines have different requirements to what we have in Victoria. Where possible, we will optimise northern light to every apartment. But where that's not possible, we'll make sure that our glass is appropriately shaded and appropriately sized for the orientation. And sometimes that does mean that we have south-facing glazing because we need natural light to certain spaces. And then that's just kind of counterbalanced by how the building as a whole performs and designing a really good thermal envelope. So we're designing apartments with a maximum window-to-wall ratio of about 50%, so that we're not designing 100% of a wall being glass and therefore designing a big hole into our thermal envelope.
And it's a really careful, as you said, it's a very careful balance of optimising that window-to-wall. That's probably the number one impact on how comfortable a home feels, because a wall performs a lot better than glass. But obviously people love being able to see out, getting light, getting their views. So it is a careful line that developers have to then...
They also don't like people being able to see in at all times.
That's true, yeah.
No, that's very true. Yeah, you always see the blinds are always shut.
All closed,
like
closed,
for some
exactly.
buildings I drive past, or for some buildings, say I walk around Wentworth Point and there's heaps of towers, like all the blinds look like they've never been opened.
So it is a really fine balancing act. And I think, there was... a trend where we got seduced by the maximum glass possible in apartments, particularly in CBD areas. And, cities like New York have tabled the idea of banning excessive glass in towers. And New York was one of the first cities with a skyscraper. So, if we can learn from good international sort of precedents and thinking around the future of our skyscrapers, has to kind of look different to what we've been building in the last, 20 years.
So speaking of overseas, how does Australia compare to like other countries, say like in Asia, say in Europe?
We have
like
the largest housing in the world. We have larger housing on average than the US and Canada.
So when you say larger housing, as in space, or
the average, I'm going to sort of talk New South Wales here. The average size of a new dwelling, a new house, I should say, in New South Wales is 239 square metres.
Right.
The average household size is 2.57 people. So that's like 93 square metres per person, which is kind of insane.
Yeah.
Fortunately, when we mix that in with townhouses and apartments, the average size of a new townhouse or apartment is about 118 square metres. That's still quite large, but not nowhere near the 239 square metres. And so I guess, and the reason that size is really important is because a larger space takes more operational energy to heat and cool. It also takes more raw materials just to build that space. So from a materials consumption perspective and an embodied carbon perspective, there is, as much as it could be the most sustainably built space, there is more raw material and therefore more embodied carbon associated with that space, unless someone's managed to design a zero embodied carbon building. And there's more operational carbon associated with a larger home on an ongoing basis. So the size of what we're building right now has gone off the charts big. If we look at some of Australia's most expensive and sort of tightly held housing stock being old workers' cottages, that exist through, Surrey Hills, Paddington. The average size of one of those is closer to 150 square metres for a 3-bedroom house, and somehow we've got to 239 square metres for an average house. It's often also at the detriment of tree canopy cover, because the blocks aren't necessarily bigger. The houses are bigger. The blocks are the same size. They're being built on waffle slabs, which means you can't plant a tree within 5 metres, or you void the structural warranty of the slab. So there's no trees. The streets are hotter. Of course, you're not going to want to walk anywhere on a hot street either. So it's kind of this compounding effect of bigger homes with just,
I'm seeing a lot.
I mean, I personally have a tiny backyard. Yeah. It just has lots of trees.
Because of the actual,
absolutely.
Older house has been knocked down.
And I don't think we should necessarily be scared of small backyards, but the small backyard, incredibly large house is a strange it's a weird one. It's a strange dynamic we've become obsessed with in Australia.
And then also from a social connection, again, when you have large homes, you're less likely to go out and mingle with other people because you've got everything you need within your box. And
you've got 93 square metres per person living there. You don't even have to socialise with the people in your house.
It might be good sometimes.
You don't even socialise inside the house.
If you're fighting with your wife, and maybe you want to go...
when she's upstairs, I'm downstairs.
But there's a whole other conversation, and we probably won't have time for it here, but it's around appropriate living. So I'm in a family of 5 in a townhouse, and there'd be downsize a potential elderly couples in 4 and 5 bedroom homes in the same suburb. We should really be swapping.
Absolutely. The transaction costs are too high.
See if that lot for you a swap.
I'll see what we can do.
It's Chick Faithful Marketplace.
We'll see. Maybe they want to try it for a week and just, get to know each other a little bit more intimately.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably don't have time to touch on it today, but household size and appropriate house size for appropriate household size is something that is a really complex thing. And then, the people who are those downsizers in the large homes often have 6-7 investment properties as well. I'm not going to get into that. It's a complex market that you know way more about than I do.
But there's an emotional aspect to that too. They don't want to move from their family home, and the kids come back and have family dinners, and there's a whole another side. It's a whole other.
Well, and I think there's also future-proofing the fact that their kids might be struggling to get into the property market. Yeah. So what happens if they need to move home? Because it is actually incredibly hard for the younger generation to get access to the property market. So parents are almost future-proofing for the fact that their kids can't get into the property market.
We talk about it a lot. It's not only the bank of mum and dad, it's the hotel of mum and dad. Yeah. So I tell my kids, stay with us as long as you can. And as long as you want, and hopefully they eventually go. We're going to have to help them even more so.
Massively.
100%.
Is there anything, and we spoke about design considerations, but how does that speak to then the materials considerations that you're speaking to your builders about when you're building a complex?
Yeah, the materials are sort of the next frontier. So I think we've addressed the operational carbon. When you say operational, everything that you need to use when you're actually living there. So mostly electricity use. The materials it's a very challenging component. Ali talked about their approach to dematerialization, so really being conscious around what materials you use and try not to use a lot. So, you try to be authentic to the material that you're using. So if you're having a concrete structure, don't then line that with a whole bunch of materials, be it aluminium cladding or plasterboard. So try to be authentic to that. So take out materials, which you've got to balance with making a home feel like a home. You don't want to live in a concrete box, so you've got to make sure that you still get that feeling of being in a more domestic environment. But we are looking at other ways to decarbonize. So, there's the use of timber in the construction of buildings, so CLT, so building timber, buildings completely out of timber. So in Barangaroo, you can see the Essentia building completely built out of timber. So very prevalent in commercial, not so much in residential, but hopefully that starts to change. But I think generally just being more efficient in your structure, which saves developers costs. If you can have structure being really efficient, being really conscious in the materials you're using, in the materials that you then fit out the apartment with, if those can be as sustainable as possible. So the choice of timber or carpet or cork flooring or whatever you use, can they be from sustainable sources, and how easily can they be recycled at end of life? So rather than having, and I breathe through this a lot, rather than having a reconstituted stone bench top, could you have a stainless bench top? Because stainless you can infinitely recycle when the building comes end of life. So it's a really considered approach. It takes a lot of thought to think about how all these parts go together, and then how easily a builder can actually take it and run with it, because builders, they're having a tough time over the last few years and are going to continue to do so. So you've got to always balance how they're going to be able to execute on it.
It's interesting. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I think it's also important to try and avoid trends.
Yep.
Like, because a trend or a specific aesthetic, it will date. You know, we see it happen time and time again. And so if we're designing for a specific trend, and at Breathe, we strive to avoid design trends, and we try to design something that's timeless and that won't have a life cycle that means that it's pulled out in 5 or 10 years' time. And so obviously that's complex and not everyone loves it. It's not for everyone. Some people really want a specific design aesthetic. But if we can sort of remove a trend from aesthetic, it can still be beautiful and elegant design without being trendy right now that might in 2 years' time not be relevant, and then someone goes and pulls out perfectly good materials. But yeah, as Jan touched on, understanding what your materials are, where they're coming from. Are they coming from Australia? Are they being shipped from overseas? Are they being, and obviously this gets into the nitty gritty, and I wouldn't expect everyone to necessarily even want to be engaged with this, but are the materials being produced without slave labour? Are they being produced in safe circumstances? Are they recyclable or recycled? What is going into the building? We look at what goes into our food, but we don't look at what goes into the building. And that, obviously, one part of that is where it comes from, but also how it impacts you and your own health. Like, are there toxic materials in the things that we're putting in our homes? Are they off-gassing? Are they having a sort of silent impact on our health day to day? And if I can sort of help make that easier for people, Breathe has a sustainable materials guideline on our website, free for anyone to access.
Send us the link. We'll
I'll send it to
the
you.
show notes,
yeah,
PJ.
Very good.
Look, it just tries to sort of demystify some of these things and talk about how we go about our material selection process, and we want to be open source about that because we've done a lot of research, and it is really complex to try and understand and unravel the layers of what goes into our buildings.
It's such a complex landscape. Like, you look at sustainability generally, not just in property, and there's so much to consider. Changes the way we do everything. So I mentioned that NATO's rating before. That's a really easy tool that, as I said, is underutilized, that people can see every single home and apartment for the last 30 years.
And it's been around for that long.
30 years. And you can go and have a look at how your space, how well it performs. And so the government changed recently from the minimum 6-star to 7-star. So every building now has to be 7 stars. And that 1-star difference means about a 30% saving on your energy bills. At Noise Quarter now we're at 8.2 average across all of our apartments, which we were really proud of.
How many stars are there?
10.
When we got the 6, this shows my age. When we got like 6 was the standard, I was like, I thought 5 was the maximum.
All right.
Stars. You know what I mean?
Did really well.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And what I find this intriguing, right? We talk about food, right? And I heard this. I read somewhere recently that the food we're eating now, because it's the same brand and the same package and the same food, we think it's the same as when we were growing up, for example. But if you actually look at the ingredients list now versus when we're eating it as kids, for example, it's actually very different. There's so much more preservatives and all these extra ingredients in food today, but we don't even realise.
Which, if you applied the same logic
It's
to
the same.
materials, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's the
there's
same.
raw materials and there's raw food.
Yeah.
And then there's there's food that's made up of a whole lot of additives and things that we can't even pronounce. And it's the same with materials.
Yeah.
There's glues and adhesives and like components in all these materials that we don't know what some of them are, and they might look like timber, but they're not.
It's not. And that's why I make the comparison, because you mentioned timber, and I'm like, and we speak about how my 70s building has no gas, and it's like, well, we're going back to how it used to. We've went so far in this opposite direction. We now need to go back, and it's so intriguing. I think really interesting, and it's probably where we need to end the convo, because this has been the most insightful conversation. I think if anyone's listening or watching, go watch it again or watch it a little bit slower, because there's a lot to take in, and there's a lot to take in. But really, the final takeaway I want for our viewers and listeners, they're all out in the property market looking at the moment. What should they be asking? So they walk into, if they're co-posit buyers and they're walking into a Mulpha development and they're asking, what should they be asking for? So I'm going to start with you, Ali. What's the big one takeaway? What would you ask for? And I know there's probably a lot, but what is it? I can come back to you if you need to think about it.
Ultimately, I think, given that gas is still allowed in homes in New South Wales and a lot of your buyers are in New South Wales, I think ultimately, if we can just start to have that conversation about gas, is there induction, is this apartment all electric? And if the answer is not yes, it's, how would I get it to all electric? And if that just seems way too complex, walk away from something that, if someone's still plumbing gas into a building, I wouldn't be ashamed to walk away from a new home with gas in it.
That's a big one.
I think the materials conversation is really important, but a lot more layered and complex. So if there's one really easy thing, it's to think about whether there's gas in the home or not. And as Jan said, what the future value of gas in a home might be or might not be.
Yep. Good one. Yeah.
I completely agree. All electric building. And then second is the NATO score. Find out what that is. It's a public document, so any apartment you can find out what it is. You don't have to, the developer doesn't have to hold it back. You can go and look on a council website. They have to submit it to councils as part of their DAs. So it's a very easily accessible document, and it informs you on how comfortable your space is going to be to occupy.
Just also informs you about your future financial freedom. If you're not spending an extra 30% on your bills, that's massive in terms of everyday savings. And we talk about upfront affordability, but we also talk about ongoing affordability of more sustainable homes. And if we can empower your listeners to have more sustainable homes, but also have better financial freedom.
Well, when you hear that electricity bills are going up 9% by the end of the year, or potentially, you've got to start considering these things too, right? Hey, man.
Well, it's really interesting because something that I personally would have never thought about, just the aspect of sustainability when looking at property. So if I'm having a conversation with my clients, I'm usually talking about strata rates. Look at the strata report. What issues and so forth. But I feel like now I'd be asking the client, ask the developer or ask the salesperson, what are the sustainability features of the building?
Yeah, so the future-proof.
And if they don't even understand the question, then I think that says a lot about what the focus is. So that's really insightful for me, because that's something like, I feel like you don't know what you don't know. So you don't even know to ask about it, because it's not even something that'll come across your mind when you're looking at a property or brand new building. What's the sustainability features of this building?
And careful of the greenwash. So when I say greenwash, where developers say, or salespeople say, it's got solar panels and EV charging. You have to put solar panels on every building now, and an EV charger is a 15 grand add-on. So just be very careful of how some things can be misconstrued as making the development sustainable.
Rainwater tanks and solar panels not
that's minimum compliance.
I feel like I heard a lot about rainwater tanks when our clients were building houses, like doing knockdown rebuilds or buying a brand new house, like water
Great
tank.
Feature.
Water tank. It's got a water tank, so it must be top of the line, sustainable.
Like everything has a water tank.
But
that's the standard.
Yeah.
I love this. Great conversation, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Our next conversation is going to be our first ever live. So if you want to join us, links will be in the show notes. Nicola Power from Domain will be joining us as well. We'll be talking about fear of the unknown. And again, it's the questions you should be asking. Could be some of this sort of stuff as well. But if you want to be there in person while we record live, link will be in the show notes. You can come and join us, please. It will be great to have an awesome crowd there. But I want to thank you both for being here today, and you too, Jason.
Oh, thanks, man.
But incredible conversation. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot as well. So thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
See you next time.
This is Jason He, the sexiest voice in property, here to tell you that the Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.